left to die alone in the desert she had given up. Until a silent Apache warrior found her, the sun was relentless. Its heat beat down on the desert landscape, turning the sand into a golden, blinding expanse that stretched endlessly in all directions. For many, the desert was a place of death, a place where only the strongest survived. But for her, it was more than that. It was the place where everything had changed. She had come here with hope, but now that hope was fading quickly, like the water she had left behind. She had been traveling for days, her canteen long emptied, the sun showing no mercy as she stumbled across the dry earth. Her body ached from exhaustion, her throat burning with thirst. The journey had been meant to be temporary, a short trek across the desert to reach a place of safety. But now all she could think about was the endless horizon ahead, and how little strength she had left to reach it. Her mind wandered back to the moment when it all had gone wrong. She had been part of a small group, traveling with people she had known for years. But as the days wore on, tensions grew. The heat had affected them all, made them irritable, and quick to anger. One by one, the group began to fracture. First, there was a fight over supplies. Then, some of them began to question if they could even make it through the desert at all. She had tried to keep her head down, tried to focus on moving forward, but it was hard when the people around you were falling apart. The leader of their group had become more and more distant, and with each passing day it became clearer that he was no longer focused on getting them all to safety. She had heard whispers of plans to abandon the weaker members, those who weren't able to keep up with the grueling pace. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but when she woke one morning to find herself alone, it became undeniable. Her heart had sunk when she realized that the others had left her behind. They hadn't even bothered to say goodbye. There had been no discussion, no consideration for her at all. She was just another casualty of the harsh desert. They had gone, taking the remaining water and supplies with them, leaving her to die alone. At first, she had tried to keep going, to walk through the pain, to push herself past the exhaustion. She kept telling herself that they would come back for her, that they wouldn't leave her like this. But as the days wore on, the hope of being rescued faded like the shadows at dusk. The sun set, and another day began. Brutally hot, relentlessly dry. Her skin was sunburned, blistering in some spots. Her lips cracked and bled from the dehydration. She had tried to call out for help, but her voice barely made it past her parched throat. She had no idea where she was anymore. All she knew was that the vast desert was swallowing her, inch by inch. She had been walking, but now she couldn't walk anymore. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, and the ground beneath her feet was spinning. The thirst had become unbearable, and her body was shutting down. She stumbled across a dune, her vision blurred, her steps unsteady. She didn't know how much farther she could go. Her mind had begun to slip, thoughts growing faint. She thought of her family, of her home, of the life she had once known. It seemed like a distant memory now. She wanted to scream, to call out to the world to come and save her, but she couldn't find the strength. With a final, desperate step, she collapsed into the sand. The world went dark. She couldn't feel her body anymore, couldn't hear the wind or the distant cry of a bird. It was as though she had become part of the desert itself, one more lost soul in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. For a long while she lay there motionless, waiting for the end. Her thoughts grew distant, fading away as if being carried off by the wind. She wondered if anyone would ever find her, if anyone would even know she had been here. The desert was indifferent. It did not care. It was a place where people disappeared, leaving only traces behind, like footprints in the sand that the wind soon erased. In her last moments of consciousness, she thought she saw something. A figure in the distance. At first it was only a blur, a shadow moving against the horizon. But then it became clearer, a man walking across the sand, his form steady and unhurried. She blinked, trying to focus her eyes. But it was difficult. Her vision was failing and her body was so weak that even lifting her head felt impossible. The figure was moving toward her, slowly but surely, the way a person might walk when they knew they had time. She wanted to call out, to beg him for help, but her voice wouldn't come. Her throat felt like it was closing up. All she could do was watch him approach, her eyes growing heavier with each passing second. He was close now. She could see him clearly, a man of the desert, dressed in simple clothing that blended with the landscape. He moved with a quiet grace, like someone who belonged to the land. There was something about him that seemed both mysterious and powerful. He wasn't in a hurry, nor did he seem surprised to find her here. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment. She tried to raise her hand to signal to him, but it was too late. Her body had given up. The man knelt beside her, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, his features unreadable. He didn't speak. His eyes scanned her face, and then he gently lifted her up, cradling her as if she were fragile, a child in need of care. She could feel the warmth of his touch, strong yet gentle, as he moved her into the shade of a nearby rock. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how grateful she was, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was rest in his arms, her breathing shallow, her world fading into darkness. For a moment she thought she might die in his arms, alone in the desert, but there was something different about this man. He hadn't left her. He had found her when everyone else had abandoned her. In that moment she realized something deep inside her. She wasn't completely alone. Not yet. There was still hope. The heat of the desert was a constant companion, pressing down on everything in sight. But even in this harsh, dry land, the Apache warrior moved with the ease of someone who had known the desert for all his life. His steps were purposeful, each one leaving a light imprint on the sand. He had lived through seasons of hardship, survived storms and scorching sun, and learned the rhythm of the desert. It was a place where life and death coexisted, and only the most resilient endured. As he walked across the barren landscape, his thoughts were on his usual routine. He had no particular destination in mind. He never did. For the Apache warrior, the desert was his home, and wherever he went, he was always connected to the land in a way that few others could understand. He had learned to trust the signs the desert gave him, the way the wind moved, the patterns in the sand, the direction of the birds flying overhead. But this day was different. He had come across something he hadn't expected. A woman, lying in the sand as if she were a forgotten soul. Her body was a mere shadow of a person, and her face was hidden beneath a layer of dust. She was motionless, her body barely breathing, if at all. For a moment the warrior thought he might have imagined her, his eyes playing tricks on him under the intense heat. But as he drew closer, he saw the woman more clearly. She was real, and she was in trouble. There was no hesitation in the warrior's movements. He knelt beside her, assessing the situation. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked and dry, and her eyes were closed. She was a stranger to him, her presence here a mystery. She didn't belong in the desert, not without water, not without proper supplies. There was no telling how long she had been out here, left to die under the unforgiving sun. Yet something about her struck him, her spirit perhaps, her will to survive, despite everything. The warrior could see that she was barely hanging on. He placed a hand on her forehead, feeling the heat radiating off her. It was clear she had been here too long. His first instinct was to leave her, to continue his journey without turning back. After all, he had no obligation to her. The desert was harsh and unforgiving to those who weren't prepared. Many people had come here before, lost and hopeless, never to be seen again. It was a place where life didn't always win. But he couldn't just walk away. His heart told him otherwise. The warrior wasn't sure why, but something about this woman pulled at him. It wasn't just her condition. It was the way she lay there, almost as if waiting. He felt an odd sense of responsibility, though he knew nothing about her. The desert had a way of shaping people, testing them, and right now he couldn't ignore the test in front of him. He carefully lifted her, his arms strong but gentle. She was lighter than he had expected, her body frail from the lack of food and water. As he cradled her, he thought about how many people had passed through this desert before, many of them lost forever. Yet here he was, carrying a woman he had never met, with no idea who she was or how she had come to be here. Her body seemed to grow heavier with every step, but the warrior was determined. He didn't rush. There was no need to. The desert was vast and empty, but it had its own rhythm, its own pace, and he had learned long ago to move with it. His instincts guided him as he walked, knowing that there was a place not far from here, a sheltered spot in the desert where he could help her recover. As he walked, he glanced down at her. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. For a moment, he wondered if she would survive. The desert was unforgiving to those who were unprepared, and it had no mercy for the weak. But something in him refused to believe that she was beyond help. He could feel her life still clinging to her, fragile but present. Eventually, after what felt like hours, he reached his hidden camp. It wasn't much, just a few rocks, a small fire pit, and some sparse brush for shade. It was the kind of place that only someone who knew the desert well could find. The warrior had used it many times in the past, a refuge when the desert became too overwhelming even for him. The woman was still unconscious, her body limp in his arms, but he knew she needed rest, and this was the only place he could offer her any chance of survival. He gently placed her on the ground, arranging her so that she was sheltered from the harsh sunlight. His hands moved with a calm precision as he set about preparing a place for her to recover. He built a small fire, the crackling sound of the flames filling the otherwise quiet air. The warrior had learned many skills in his life: how to survive, how to hunt, how to navigate the desert. But one thing he had never fully learned was how to trust others. It was something that had been lost to him long ago, after he had seen too much pain, too much loss. The desert had taken everything from him: his family, his people, his past. And now here he was, alone with a woman he didn't know, a woman who had been abandoned just like he had been. He set to work, gathering what he needed to help her. There was no time to waste. She needed water, food, and rest. He had a small supply of water in his canteen, just enough to help her. He soaked a cloth in the cool liquid and gently pressed it against her forehead, hoping to bring her some comfort. Her skin was hot, and he could feel the warmth of her body against his hands. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the warrior spoke aloud, though it was more to himself than to her. "You're not alone," he muttered softly. Not anymore. He didn't expect her to hear him, but saying it out loud felt like the right thing to do. His words carried the weight of everything he had been through, his own struggles, his own pain, and now his decision to help someone else. The desert was cruel, yes, but it also held moments of kindness, small and rare, like this one. As he sat beside her, watching her slowly start to regain some color, he couldn't help but wonder about the life she had led before this moment. What had brought her to the desert? What had driven her to the point of death and abandonment? These questions floated in his mind, unanswered, but he didn't press her for answers. It wasn't his place. His task now was simple: to help her survive, to give her the chance she needed to heal. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the horizon. The warrior kept watch over her, his eyes scanning the desert, always alert. But he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace settle over him. There was something about this woman, something that told him she wasn't just another lost soul in the desert. There was a fire inside her. Even if it was nearly extinguished, he could feel it, and that gave him hope. As night fell and the desert air grew cooler, he sat by the fire, still keeping watch. He had done what he could for now. The woman was safe for the moment. Tomorrow he would tend to her needs again. But tonight he allowed himself to rest, just for a little while. The silence of the desert was peaceful, and he realized that, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone. The woman, lying unconscious by his fire, had been given a chance. The warrior had found her, just when she had given up, just when she thought she had nothing left. In that moment, as the stars above shone brightly in the clear desert sky, both of them knew that something had changed. The desert had a way of taking life, but it also had a way of giving it back when it was least expected. The desert night stretched on, cool and quiet, with only the soft crackling of the fire breaking the stillness. The woman slept peacefully now, her breathing more steady, though still shallow. The warrior sat a short distance away, his eyes never straying far from her. He had seen many things in his life, things that made him doubt the goodness of the world. The desert, with its harshness, was no stranger to him. It could bring life or take it in an instant. But there was something different about this woman, something that kept him from leaving her behind. He didn't know why he felt this way. Perhaps it was because she had been left to die, abandoned just as he had been. Or maybe it was because, in a strange way, he saw a reflection of his own struggle in her. He didn't want to dwell on it. He had learned long ago that feelings could be dangerous, especially in a place like this. The desert had a way of consuming people, leaving them with nothing but their memories. The night passed slowly. The warrior kept the fire burning low, just enough to keep the cold at bay. His thoughts were distant, drifting between the past and the present. He thought of his people, long gone, their village destroyed in the aftermath of battles that seemed endless. The desert had claimed so much from him. It had claimed his family, his home, and left him to wander alone, searching for something that he could never quite grasp. He had lived like this for years, moving from one place to the next, never staying in one spot for too long. It was the only way he knew how to survive. The world outside the desert was full of noise, full of people who didn't understand the way of the land. He had found peace in solitude, in silence. But now, sitting by the fire, he felt a flicker of something else. It was something unfamiliar, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. The woman shifted in her sleep, her face contorted in pain for a moment before relaxing again. The warrior's gaze softened. She was a stranger to him, but in her vulnerability, she seemed like something more. He could tell that she was strong, perhaps even more so than she realized. There was something in the way she had survived the desert's cruelty, even when it seemed impossible. He knew she had a story, a reason for being out here alone, but he didn't press her for it. He wasn't sure what would happen if she woke up. Would she thank him? Would she be angry that he had saved her, taken her from the desert that had nearly claimed her life? He had no answers. His world had always been simple: survive, move forward, and don't look back. Yet now, with this woman in his care, he found himself wondering what it would be like to share that simple world with someone else. By morning, the woman had awoken, her eyes fluttering open, adjusting to the light. She blinked, disoriented, and her gaze moved slowly to the warrior sitting by the fire. For a moment, she said nothing, just staring at him. The warrior didn't speak either. He simply watched her, waiting. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke, her voice hoarse. "Where am I?" The warrior tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "The desert," he said quietly. "You were dying. I brought you here." She blinked, confusion mixing with disbelief. I was alone. I thought." Her words trailed off as she tried to sit up, but the effort made her wince. The warrior rose from his spot and moved over to her, offering his hand to help her. "Don't try to stand just yet," he said gently. "You need rest." She accepted his help, though she didn't speak again at first. She seemed to gather herself, taking in her surroundings. An abandoned patch of earth with rocks for shelter, a fire that was now burning low, and the man who had saved her life. He looked different from anyone she had known. His face was stoic, but there was something calm and steady about him. Like the desert itself, he was a part of this land, connected to it in a way that felt both foreign and familiar to her. For a moment, the woman just looked at him. She could tell that he wasn't from her world. He had a presence about him that spoke of hardship, of survival, of a life spent in solitude. He wasn't like the people she had traveled with, the ones who had left her behind. The warrior was different. He didn't speak much, and there was a quiet strength in him that made her feel safe. "I thought I was going to die," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. The warrior's eyes softened, and he nodded, as if he understood that feeling all too well. He said nothing at first, just sat beside her and watched the fire. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The desert had a way of teaching people to embrace silence, to listen to what wasn't being said. "Why did you save me?" she asked after a while, her voice still raw. The warrior looked at her then, his gaze steady. "You were alone," he replied simply. "I don't leave people alone in the desert." His answer surprised her. She had expected something more complicated, some explanation that made sense of his actions, but his response was direct, without pretense. It wasn't about heroism or pity, it was just a decision. And that was enough for her to trust him, even if she didn't fully understand why.
"Thank you,"
she whispered, her words barely audible. The warrior nodded in response, his expression still unreadable. He didn't need her gratitude. In this land, survival was something that had to be earned. It was a gift, one that required strength, determination, and a willingness to face the harshest realities of life. Over the next few days, the woman's condition improved. The warrior kept watch over her, making sure she had enough water and food to regain her strength. The desert was never kind, but it offered what it could, if you knew where to look. The warrior hunted small game and gathered what herbs and plants he could find. He taught her how to preserve the water they had, how to move with the sun, how to survive in a world where the ground could swallow you whole. Each day, they spoke less, but in the silence, there was understanding. She began to notice the way he moved, how he seemed at ease with the desert, as though he had always belonged here. She started to ask him questions about his life, though he answered little. He never spoke of his past, never mentioned his name. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a quiet assurance that he wasn't trying to hide anything. He simply didn't need to share it. As the days turned into weeks, the woman started to feel stronger, though she was still far from her old self. But she had come to respect the warrior, his strength, his patience, and his quiet wisdom. He never pushed her to speak, never tried to pry into her life. He simply helped her heal, showing her how to adapt to the desert's rhythms. And though they were both survivors, each with their own scars, they found a quiet peace in each other's company. Neither of them had asked for this connection, but it had grown nonetheless. In the vast empty desert, the bond between them felt like a lifeline, fragile yet unbreakable. As the warrior watched the woman regain her strength, he realized something that he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had always believed. The days were becoming warmer, and the desert was beginning to shift its colors as the season changed. It was still harsh and unforgiving, but there were moments when the sun softened and the sky seemed to stretch endlessly above them, as if it was giving them a brief reprieve. The woman had regained some strength, though she was far from her former self. But now, as she moved around the camp with more ease, she found herself becoming more aware of the warrior and the way he existed in the desert. At first, their interactions had been practical. He gave her water when she was thirsty, food when she was hungry, and made sure she rested when she was weak. But gradually, their silence had begun to hold something more. She began to notice how he moved, graceful yet purposeful, like a shadow blending with the land. His every step seemed calculated, as though he could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him. She started to see the quiet strength in him that made him almost part of the desert itself. One morning, as the sun started to rise and paint the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, she woke to find the warrior already up, preparing for the day. He had a routine, a rhythm that never changed, and she had started to respect it. He moved in a way that suggested he had been doing this for years, not just surviving, but living in harmony with the harsh land. She watched him from a distance, noting how his eyes scanned the horizon, how his body was always alert to the slightest movement, the smallest sound. She could feel her curiosity growing. There was so much she wanted to ask him, but she hesitated. The warrior had never spoken much about himself. He kept his past shrouded in mystery, and though she was growing more comfortable in his presence, she still didn't feel like she could ask him the questions that weighed on her heart. What had brought him to this place? Was he always alone, or had he once had a family? Had he ever loved someone the way she had loved others before? This desert swallowed them whole. She sat up and watched him move through his morning routine, and a thought crossed her mind. What would it be like to know him, to understand the things he had lived through? But then, she reminded herself of her own story. She hadn't come here looking for companionship. She had been running. hiding, hoping to find a place of peace in a world that had betrayed her. She was still unsure of what she was looking for, and yet this quiet man who had saved her seemed to hold some sort of wisdom in his silence. After a while, the warrior glanced over at her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. He didn't say anything, but she could see something in the way he looked at her. It was the same look he had given her when he had found her in the desert, calm, measured, as though he had no need to rush her or force her to speak. He was simply there, and somehow that made her feel less alone.
"Do you ever find the blood?"
"Talk about your past," she asked, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. The warrior didn't respond immediately. He stood still for a moment, his eyes thoughtful, his hands resting on the hilt of his knife. He was silent as always, but this time there was a flicker of something in his expression, a fleeting hesitation, a shift in his posture. "I don't," he finally said, his voice low but steady. "The past is something we can't change. It's what we do with the present that matters." His words were simple, but they resonated with her in a way she hadn't expected. She had always carried the weight of her past with her, and it had shaped the decisions she made, the way she saw the world. But the warrior was different. He didn't seem to let his past dictate his future. Instead, he lived each day as it came, his focus always on survival, always on the present moment. She nodded, processing his words. It made sense, in a way. There were so many things she wished she could change about her past, so many decisions she regretted. But the warrior's words seemed to offer a kind of freedom, a release from the burden of trying to control what had already happened. "I understand," she replied quietly, though she wasn't sure if she truly did. She wasn't ready to let go of her past, not yet. It still haunted her, a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the mistakes she had endured. But something in the way the warrior spoke, with such conviction, made her want to try. As the days passed, their silence became comfortable. They spent their time gathering what they needed from the land, hunting, collecting water, and finding shelter from the sun. The warrior was always patient, teaching her how to read the signs of the desert, how to track animals, how to recognize the plants that could provide them with food or medicine. He didn't offer much explanation, but she found herself learning quickly. One evening, as the sun began to set and the cool desert air replaced the heat of the day, they sat by the fire. The warrior had gone out to hunt, and when he returned, he had brought back a small rabbit. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the two of them. She watched him prepare the meat with skilled hands, his movements smooth and practiced. There was something almost ritualistic about the way he worked, as though every task, no matter how small, was important. The fire crackled in the quiet night, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of peace. She didn't feel the gnawing loneliness that had followed her for so long, nor did she feel the desperation to escape. The desert was still harsh, but in this small, simple moment, it felt less like a place of death and more like a place of survival, of life, however fragile it might be.
"Why did you leave your people?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet night.
She hadn't meant to ask the question, but it had been on her mind for days. The warrior had never spoken about his past, never mentioned the people he had come from. She didn't expect him to answer, but she felt the need to ask. For a long moment he didn't say anything, just stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes. Then, finally he spoke, his voice softer than before.
"I didn't leave them,"
he said, almost to himself. "They were taken from me, by the desert, by those who didn't understand." She didn't need him to explain further. She could hear the pain in his words, the weight of loss that lingered beneath them. The warrior had lost everything, and in the silence that followed, she felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. He had been shaped by the desert, just as she had. It had taken from them both, but it had also given them something else, a kind of strength, a quiet resilience that came from surviving the worst. She didn't know what to say in response. Instead, she simply nodded, her heart heavy with empathy for him. The warrior had chosen to stay in the desert, to live in its silence, to find peace in its vastness. But even he had a past, one that he couldn't escape. The fire crackled again, and they both sat in silence, the weight of the night and the desert pressing in around them. They were survivors, both of them, in a place where only the strongest could endure. And though their paths had been different, though their stories had been shaped by different hands, they were both here now, in this moment, sharing the same space. In the desert where so many had failed, they had found each other. The days had blurred together, and the desert had become both a prison and a sanctuary. The woman had learned more in the weeks spent in the warrior's company than she had in her entire life. He had taught her how to read the signs of the land, how to survive in the harshest of environments, but beyond survival he had taught her something more, something she hadn't realized she needed until now. He had taught her how to be at peace with herself, to accept the things she couldn't change, and to let go of the weight of the past. The days were still long, the sun relentless in its pursuit of every living thing in the desert. But there was something different now. She no longer felt the same sense of desperation she had when she first arrived. The desert, once a symbol of everything she had lost, had become a place where she found herself again, a place where she could heal. The warrior, too, had changed. Though he had never spoken much, there was a quiet shift in him. He no longer seemed like a man defined only by the past. His presence had become more steady, more rooted in the present. He had once been a man of few words, a man who trusted no one, but now he seemed to understand that even in the silence of the desert there was something worth living for. One morning after another long night under the stars, the woman woke to find him standing at the edge of their camp, staring into the distance. She could tell that something was different about him that day, something she couldn't quite put into words. He had a look in his eyes, a look of determination mixed with something else, something she hadn't seen in him before. He turned to her when he noticed she had woken. His face, as always, was unreadable, but there was a quiet energy in his gaze that spoke volumes. "We need to go," he said simply. She blinked, not fully understanding. "Go? Go where?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon, as though he was gauging the right moment. Finally, he spoke again, his voice steady but with an edge of finality. "It's time for you to continue your journey. You've healed, and it's not right for you to stay here any longer." The woman felt a sudden rush of emotions, a mix of confusion, sadness, and a sense of loss. It wasn't the warrior's words that caught her off guard, but the fact that they were no longer bound to the desert together. She had come to rely on him, to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. The thought of leaving this place, leaving him, felt impossible, as if she were being torn between two parts of herself. "But I don't want to leave," she said quietly. "I don't want to be alone again. I don't want to go back out there." The warrior's gaze softened, and for a brief moment she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding. He had never been one for words, but his actions had always spoken louder than anything he could say. "You're not alone," he said, his voice low and calm. "Not anymore. The desert gave us this time, this peace. But now you need to live your life again. I can't walk with you on that path, but you can walk it on your own." She looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness. He was simply stating the truth. She had healed, and now she needed to find her way forward. She had learned everything she could from him, everything she needed to know to survive in the world outside of this desert. "I understand," she said softly, "but it's hard to imagine life without you in it. You're the reason I'm still here, still breathing." The warrior nodded, his expression still unreadable, but there was a quiet strength in his movements. He didn't need her thanks, didn't need any words. His actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say. "There will be others," he said. "There always are. You're strong, stronger than you know. You'll make it through. This is your path now, not mine. And the desert, well, it has its own way of guiding people. It's time for me to continue my journey as well." The woman felt a lump form in her throat, a surge of emotion she couldn't quite hold back. She had come to this place broken, lost. But now, thanks to him, she had found something she hadn't realized she needed. She had found herself again. The warrior had taught her how to survive not just in the desert but in life. He had shown her that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about finding peace within yourself, accepting the things you couldn't control, and moving forward. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, side by side, looking out at the vast desert stretching before them. The wind stirred the sand, and in that quiet moment the woman realized that she had come to understand the desert in a way she never had before. It was not just a place of death and hardship.
It was a place where life could begin again, where people could find a new path if they were willing to embrace it.
"I'll never forget you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
The warrior's gaze flickered toward her, and for the first time she saw the smallest hint of a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "You don't have to," he replied softly. "I'm always with you in the desert. And you'll always have the strength to keep going. Just remember what you've learned here." With that, he turned and began walking away, his figure blending into the desert landscape. He didn't look back, and she didn't expect him to. This was his life, his path to follow. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. She had come to this place broken, but now she was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. As she watched him disappear into the distance, she felt a sense of gratitude fill her heart. The warrior had given her more than just survival. He had given her hope, a new beginning, and the knowledge that no matter how hard life became, she would never give up. With a deep breath, she turned away from the campfire and began to walk in the opposite direction, back into the desert, back to the world that awaited her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. The warrior had shown her how to survive. Now she was ready to live.